Here, Question Period Canada, thundering Thursdays. It's going to be a wild day in the House of Parliament. I'm pretty positive it's going to be nuts. It's been pretty crazy on, well, yesterday was out of hand. Trudeau doesn't even seem to be trying anymore. He just takes Poilievre's punches and then gets up and talks about things that have nothing to do with what Poilievre is talking about. Poilievre had him on his heels yesterday. Anyways, they're doing their statements right now, so we're going to jump in right away. Get her going. Here we go.
Brampton.
Hey, Heather, what's up?
History continues to be made. Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month. The honourable member from Oxford.
Mr. Speaker, while common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and bring home safe streets, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, the corruption, or the chaos. GC Strategies, a two-person company, designed the Arrive scam app, which did not work, which we did not need, and wrongfully sent 10,000 Canadians to quarantine, missing work and time with their loved ones. This app was supposed to cost only $80,000, but the Auditor General has confirmed that it cost $60 million. Public officials refuse to show up at committee. Emails have been deleted, and now the RCMP is investigating. Yesterday, the Liberals continued their cover-up corruption by voting against our common sense motion to release all documents related to the Arrive scam app. What are they hiding? Only common sense Conservatives will get to the bottom of this new Liberal scandal and bring home accountability for Canadians. Thank you.
Good job, President. The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know they're not worth the cost. We know they're not worth the corruption, and now we know they're a risk to Canadians' safety. And just a few years ago, think back, the Prime Minister mussed about how he admires the basic dictatorship of China. And now we know Beijing's agents infiltrated a top-level lab to steal sensitive secrets, including the genetic code to Ebola. The CSIS reports, and I quote, Dr. Chu represents a very serious and credible danger to the Government of Canada due to the potential for theft of dangerous materials attractive to terrorists and foreign entities that conduct espionage to infiltrate and damage the economic security of Canada. And yet, under this Liberal Prime Minister, nothing was done to protect Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canadians had had enough of this corrupt Liberal government that is now actually a threat to the security of Canadians.
The honourable member from Don Valley West.
Mr. Speaker, the people of Don Valley West are mourning the recent loss of two giants, the Honourable Alan Redway and the Honourable John Godfrey. As parliamentarians and citizens, they have left indelible marks. They were models of graciousness, intelligence, and passion. Alan Redway distinguished himself as Mayor of East York and as a Conservative Member of Parliament. A true red Tory, he served as Minister of State for Housing, and from his home in Leaside, he remained a committed advocate for food security and housing. He offered advice and support with good humour and grace. He always encouraged me to stay true to what he called our shared values. John Godfrey, my immediate predecessor, served the people of Don Valley West in this place for 15 years, in Canada as Minister of State for Infrastructure and Communities. An educator, administrator, journalist, environmentalist, husband, father, and friend, his life was committed to public service. Together, the two of them inspired me, and I think inspire everyone in this House for their good works. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
He didn't come out against the Liberals. He kind of got hung up in a dirty way. Somebody recorded him.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honour a distinguished NDP colleague and steadfast servant of Elmwood Transcona. As the honourable member steps down from his parliamentary seat, we reflect on a remarkable tenure, a tenure defined by a commitment to his constituents, a passionate advocacy for workers' rights, and a relentless pursuit of justice defined best by his prairie brand of democratic socialism. The always honourable member's proud roots in Winnipeg, deeply entwined with his family's legacy of public service laid a foundation for his principled approach to governance. He brought to this House and our caucus a rare combination of intellectual depth and practical wisdom shaped by the background as an electrician and proud member of IBEW Local 2085. His voice in Parliament has been one of reason, compassion, and solidarity, especially for those on the margins of society. My brother, you have always been more than just a friend and a colleague, and your presence here will be profoundly missed. Thank you for your service.
Hey, Jack, what's up? Standing ovation.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly.
Hey, Alan,
The
what's up?
honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Today, I would like to pay tribute to an exceptional man from my riding, Laurentides-Labelle, a rare pearl who is a volunteer and has been a volunteer for 60 years
Doing
in
good, Jack.
volunteer
Thank you.
sport. Monsieur Pierre Fournel
Looking forward to a pretty
got the
crazy
Lieutenant Governor's
time in
Medal
Parliament.
last January. His
My cat
candidacy
is flipping
for
out.
this high distinguishment was chosen
In case I
logically
have to
because of
run,
his
she's being
strong
weird.
devotion. He spread his passion of sport to youth. For decades
Terry, what's
now,
up?
he's allowed thousands of young sportsmen and sportswomen to take part in quality sports. Despite his venerable age, he is still active and takes part in
Hey, Richard,
his
what's going on?
community's events. And I hope that his volunteering will be a model for generations to come. Thank you.
The honourable member from Chilliwack Hope.
After 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the corruption or the cover-up.
Flips,
These
what's
Liberals
up?
fought tooth and nail to prevent Canadians from getting the documents that told the truth about their massive security breach at Canada's top-level laboratory, and we now know why they were so eager
Hey, Joan,
to
what's
cover
up? I'm
them
doing
up.
good. How
The
are you?
documents reveal that this Liberal government allowed two scientists who were a very serious and credible danger and a realistic and credible threat to Canada's economic security to compromise the Winnipeg lab. CSIS reported that one of the scientists intentionally transferred scientific knowledge and materials to China to benefit the PRC. The Prime Minister has said he admires China's basic dictatorship, so it's no surprise that under his watch, the regime in Beijing was allowed to infiltrate what was supposed to be one of Canada's most secure facilities. Only a common-sense Conservative government will stand on guard for our country and make sure this never happens again.
The honourable member from Markham Unionville.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament for Markham Unionville, I rise today with great pride on this final day of Black History Month. Throughout this month, I have had the immense pleasure of attending numerous events both here in Ottawa and
Leap year this
my
year, right?
community of Markham.
February 29th.
As we reflect
Anybody
on the
have,
struggles and crimes
know
of Black
anybody with a
Canadians,
birthday
we are
on
reminded
February
of their
29th?
immense contribution to every aspect of our society, from arts and culture to business and politics. Black Canadians have shaped our nation in profound ways. To all my constituents in Markham Unionville and to the organizations like YRAC and MACA, thank you for your work in the month of February, and my heartfelt wishes for a very happy conclusion to Black History Month. I hope this month has been a time of learning, celebration, and above all, a reminder of our shared commitment to diversity and inclusion.
Hey,
Thank
Randy,
you, Mr.
what's
Speaker.
up? How are you?
And happy Black History Month. Oral questions,
Here we go.
questions orales. The honourable
don't see
member
Trudeau.
from Wellington Halton Hills.
It's going to be Duke all day.
Mr. Speaker, not
No
only did the government neglect national security, not only did they cover up things, they continue to skirt responsibility. Yesterday, the Minister of Health said, no, high
Blue, what's
officials involved in the microbiology lab will be held responsible. If there's no one responsible, who within the cabinet will know who is responsible? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At the beginning, it's important to say that health agencies are independent, particularly in terms of national security. And it's our government that created a process to make sure that all the information is available. And it's really important for two Canadian citizens who were very well known as scientists, did bad things like this, and there is an investigation underway with the RCMP. And this is very important, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, the Canada-China Committee in 2019 could have done exactly the same job as the ad hoc committee did, and we could have had the documents 3 years ago. The CSIS assessments released yesterday make it clear the PRC is and was actively recruiting top Canadian scientists to plunder Canada's research and intellectual property. The assessments also make clear that the PRC wants to weaponize this civilian research for military purposes against us and our allies. Knowing what we know now, will the government halt all collaboration between the Winnipeg National Microbiology Laboratory and any entities and individuals in the People's Republic of China?
Hey, Jimmy, what's up?
The Honourable Minister for
I like
Health.
Michael Chong. He's
Thank you
fun.
very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that an attack on our national security by foreign nations, be it China or Russia, represents an attack on democracy and represents a direct attack on every member of this House. And that I share his outrage that China or any country would attempt to interfere in our process. The Public Health Agency, which is one of the most respected agencies in the world, hired two Canadian citizens who are eminent and well-known scientists in Canada who lied. It is the Public Health Agency that discovered that. It is the Public Health Agency that fired them, and that's why there's now an RCMP investigation about their actions.
The honourable member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
The documents, Mr. Speaker, reveal a shocking disregard for Canada's national security. They reveal a government that is completely asleep at the switch on national security and the machinery of government. They reveal government employees collaborating with Beijing's government and with the biological weapons unit of the People's Liberation Army. Equally shocking are the health minister's comments. He said yesterday there was no evidence of actual breaches at the lab and no sensitive information actually left the country. The documents say otherwise. Does the minister stand by those comments?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the two Canadian scientists in question were well known for their work in virology and had spent their time working on health treatments for those that were suffering from viruses. They are collaboration. There is absolutely no evidence of the thing that the member opposite is suggesting, and I do not think that it is at all appropriate to suggest that they were involved with weaponization or things of this nature. They have all the documents, they can see all the information. We have waived all the normal considerations, not only of national security, Mr. Speaker, but of employee relationships that normally are kept confidential. It was our government that did that. That's why they have this information.
The honourable member from Cumberland, Colchester.
Speaker, scientists working with Ebola at Canada's only level 4 lab collaborated with the People's Republic of China Army Major General. Sadly, this story does not end there. Dr. Chu was able to gain access to the lab for students from China, and it gets worse. A scientist from the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, the research arm of the PLA, known to work on biology-enabled warfare. How did so many citizens from a hostile superpower gain access to Canada's top lab? Is it because the Prime Minister admires China's basic dictatorship?
Oh, good one.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Some will attempt in national security concerns to play partisan games. I think that's unfortunate. And let me just give an example. With respect to Ebola, the exchange of Ebola in 2019 was done in the context of trying to work with China and other countries on finding solutions to Ebola, which exists in so many different parts of the country. At that moment in time in 2019, the relationship with China was in a different place. The information that was shared was through legitimate channels. It has nothing to do with this issue. It was absolutely known and handled with complete control. I think it's very, very important to not mischaracterize national security for partisan interests.
I'd like to remind all members to ensure that they don't use language which would be unparliamentary directed at any of their colleagues. The honourable member from Cumberland-Colchester.
Speaker, that minister's comments are reckless and untrue. Before March 31st, 2019, the PRC did not have a containment level 4 lab. How can I be so specific about the date? This is the date on which a scientist at Canada's top lab, the National Microbiology Lab, shipped dangerous pathogens, including Ebola virus, to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This scientist had a history of visiting and collaborating with the PLA since 2016. When did the Minister of Health and the Prime Minister know about the espionage and blatant violation of our sovereignty, and when did they decide to cover it up?
They cover up so many scandals.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
The exact opposite of a cover-up occurred. It's actually this government that created the process that released these documents. So they actually refused to participate in this process. The second thing that I will say, Mr. Speaker, with respect to our national security interests, that it is essential when we're dealing with national security to recognize two things. That the party opposite is saying that they would support a partisan interference in the Public Health Agency of Canada, that if they were in government, they would see it as acceptable for political interference into that process. No, it's at an arm's length, and rightfully it is at an arm's length. They are the ones that identified these Canadian citizens, these eminent scientists, were lying, and they took action.
Order. Colleagues. The Honourable
Member for Saint Jean. The Court of Appeal has just handed down its ruling on the state secularism law, Bill 21, which has a broad consensus in Quebec. Quebecers want a clear separation of religion and state, and that's what this law guarantees. Now that the appeals court has handed down its ruling, it's clear that the next step is the Supreme Court. We saw it with Bill 101, and we'll see it again with Bill 21. What we're asking Ottawa is simple. Can you, please, stay out of it, either directly or indirectly, because Quebec knows what's good for Quebec. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
He does need a hat.
I appreciate the question, and obviously the court has just rendered its decision. I will read it, and we will reflect on it. But I'd like to say the message again that we've always given. We will always be here to defend the Charter of Human Rights, and if this ruling does get to the Supreme Court, we'll be there to intervene. The Honourable Member for Saint Jean. I repeat, Quebec knows what is good for Quebec. We know that French is not only our official language, but also our common language, and that it must be protected. We know that equality between men and women is non-negotiable. In Quebec, just like we know the best way to protect religion is to have, for the state to have none. And that's what Bill 21 is about. And that, too, is a broad consensus in Quebec. So will the Liberals, who say they don't like bickering, commit to not going against the will of Quebecers on Bill 21? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, our government has always underscored that we'll always be here to defend the Canadian Charter. This includes freedom of expression and freedom of religion.
He's a crook.
And equality. Nevertheless, if this ruling does make it to the Supreme Court of Canada, we'll be there to intervene.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
The ArriveCan Canada drama never stops. Remember we told the Liberals that they could ask public service to do the work that was required? They said, no, it's not possible. Well, it turns out that the ArriveCan contract was awarded to a D&D employee. A public servant actually did the work. Under the Liberals, public money going to private consultants tripled. Why are the Liberals trying to give the Conservatives a run for their money at how much money they can waste on private consulting?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
I actually want to thank the member for the question, because I think it's an important one. Mr. Speaker, as soon as we were made aware that the CEO of Dalian was a D&D employee, we've taken immediate action to suspend all contracts with Dalian, and I can confirm for this House that all active contracts with Dalian have been suspended. I can also confirm to this House that the member in question has also been suspended. The matter will be thoroughly investigated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Colleagues, once again, I'm going to ask colleagues to please be respectful of the questions that are asked and, of course, of the answer given for many reasons. One of them, of course, is that members who require the use of translation can't hear through their earphones if members are shouting in terms of the response. Then I have
the honourable member for Burnaby South. A 6-person family and a pregnant woman live under a highway in Montreal. They were kicked out of their apartment. They cannot find affordable housing. This is the result of the Liberals and the Conservatives who have lost more than a million units of affordable housing. Will the Liberals, or are they ashamed of their track record, or are they too disconnected from reality? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that every person in Canada has a right to a home. It is a fundamental right. We doubled funding.
Fergus is pathetic.
For communities to fight against homelessness and to make sure everyone has a roof over their heads. Mr. Speaker, we know there's a lot of work to be done, but unlike the Conservatives, it's not through bickering with municipalities that will get there. We need to sit down with everyone and find a lasting solution to homelessness in Canada. Thank you.
the honourable member from Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
This Prime Minister isn't worth the cost, the crime, the corruption, or the cover-ups. After hiding the Winnipeg lab documents from Canadians for over 3 years, we finally know why the Liberals blocked Parliament. We know that Dr. Chu had close and clandestine relationships with entities of the People's Republic of China and collaborated with military scientists. The People's Liberation Army is a known security threat to Canada.
That's right.
So why did the Prime Minister cover up this breach of national security instead of arresting these spies?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, I'll answer the first part of the question, as I suspect they're going to have other questions on the second element. On the first order, it was the first offer was to have all parliamentarians look at the documents through NSICOP. That was an immediate offer. Some opposition members said that that wasn't a good answer because they wanted to make sure that if there was a need for redactions to be released, they wanted a process. So I, as House Leader at that point in time, suggested an ad hoc process that would ensure that an independent arbiter would make the decision about releasing those documents. I would remind the member again that it is an independent decision of the Public Health Agency to make redactions. I'm sure he's not suggesting that anything else other than that should happen.
We are listening.
The honourable member from Selkirk Interlake
That
Eastman.
House Leader actually sued the Speaker. Dr. Chu maliciously shared technology and materials from the Winnipeg labs with Major General Chen, one of Beijing's top commanders at the Academy of Military Medical Science. The Academy is described in the CSIS documents as the highest medical research institution of the People's Liberation Army of the PRC and has offensive biological weapons capabilities. And one of its objectives is to transform the results of basic civilian research into military applications and biotechnologies. The Chinese military can now make more biological weapons and potentially use them against Canadians and our allies. Why did the Prime Minister cover up this national security threat?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I've already said that the documents first were released and then the additional redactions were actually commenced by us. The second point is when the member says maliciously, we don't know what their intention was. That's the purpose of an RCMP investigation. Secondly, these are individuals that I am deeply concerned about, like the member opposite. And in a process of due process, we understand what they did. With respect to the Chinese government, the military and the government and academia and scientists are all part of their military. That means that any connection that they had whatsoever would have touched that. And so I think it's careful not to
Mr. Speaker.
Colleagues, it's hard to hear, for the chair, to hear the response. If members are not satisfied with the response, sometimes the best opportunity is just to listen to it in silence and let it stand on its own. The honourable member from Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
The Health Minister should actually read the CSIS documents that actually describes all the breaches that were done and the espionage that was carried out. At the Prime Minister's top public health labs in Canada, Beijing military scientist Dr. Yan was given unfettered access to all the labs and the computer systems at the Winnipeg labs, which were covertly shared by Dr. Chu with Beijing. Instead of stopping this espionage, the Prime Minister decided to cover it up. Why did the Prime Minister put his admiration for the basic dictatorship of the Communist Party in Beijing ahead of the public safety of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to step back and really consider what the Conservative Party is saying here. At the time in which they were hired, these two Canadian citizens were eminent scientists who were well published and well regarded throughout North America. The fact that they lied and misrepresented themselves, Mr. Speaker, is reprehensible.
Colleagues, I'm going to ask members, please. I'll ask the member from Miramichi Grand Lakes, please, to keep his comments to himself until he will have the floor at the time that he asks a question. The Honourable Minister of Health has 15 seconds left on the clock.
So I would hope what they're not suggesting is that if they were in power, that they would have interfered politically, been able through clairvoyance to know that these eminent scientists, who at this point in time had no reason to believe that they were anything other than Canadian scientists who were doing good research, that they would have interfered politically with clairvoyance and got rid of them before this happened.
Look at the speaker. Is it messing with his button? Fergus drives me crazy.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we learned that there were documents with respect to the Winnipeg lab, and the worst is confirmed. There was a leak from the Chinese Communist Party, and the first person represents a serious and credible threat to Canada's economy, was able to access this level 4 laboratory. Why did he not protect Canadians, the Prime Minister? The Honourable Minister of Health. China, Russia, or any other country. Well, this is an attack against our democracy, the House of Commons, and every member here.
It flips.
And it concerns me greatly. And this is the reason why we have measures now to ensure.
ASW, how are you?
That we protect our public safety with policies that are as strong as possible to make sure our objective is not compromised. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg or Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister said that the Prime Minister said he admired the basic dictatorship of China. And this lab in Winnipeg was working on some of the most dangerous viruses in the world. And there were dangerous pathogens that were passed on to the Chinese party. Does he realize that our national safety was in peril?
Oh, no.
The Honourable Minister, what Canadians realize today, well, when we're talking about national security, it's not a partisan issue. And if there's something we won't take lessons on for the Conservative Party is protecting national security on research and science in Canada. We are the government that did the most to protect science in this country, to protect IP, to help our universities and research centres to identify risks. Mr. Speaker, last January we published a list that indicates our research institutes that not do business. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister know that on March 31st, the Ebola virus was sent to Beijing through Canada? We sent a weapon to a country that is building up its stock of biological weapons. Does the Prime Minister realize that his government failed because the Chinese government is developing biological weapons and he's putting our security at risk? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, rather than talking about facts, what we hear from the opposition today is politicizing national security. And I think that all colleagues that were elected to this chamber, their first responsibility is the security and health of Canadians. As I said, last January, we did publish a list for entities that are protected to protect national security and IP. Will always be here to defend national security in Canada. The Honourable Member for Drummond. The Court of Appeal is clear. Bill 21 is constitutional and does not pose a problem. The fact that we've recognized the right of Quebecers to create their own rules means we've turned the page. but there are a few people who continue to contest it. What will the Liberal government choose to do? Respect the will of Quebecers with this appeals court decision, or continue bickering with Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to underscore that our government is clearly committed to defending the rights of liberties protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, particularly in terms of the right of freedom of expression and the right to equality.
Hey, Jonathan,
our
what's
government has clearly expressed concerns with respect to the preventive use of the notwithstanding clause. If it does, this decision, does get to the Supreme Court, we'll be there to intervene. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Yes, we're talking about respect for charter and court decisions as well, because despite what the Liberals say, Bill 21 has nothing to be criticized for. It is legitimate. It is a pillar for living together in harmony, which Quebecers want. And Liberals' fears are unfounded. Now that the appeals court has rendered its ruling, will the government commit to not contesting this Bill 21 either directly or indirectly? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Mr. Speaker, like the Prime Minister has already said, as I've already said, our government is committed to defending the rights and liberties of Canadians protected under the Charter. Nevertheless, we have to protect freedom of religion and expression. We've also said that our government has clearly expressed concerns with respect to the preventive use of the notwithstanding clause. If this case does go before the Supreme Court, our government will intervene. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. It's worrisome. The Liberals want secularism without any trace. They don't want us to say anything. They want to make it insignificant, but separating religion and state does mean something. It means that we respect the beliefs and the non-beliefs of each other, and they never get involved in the relationship with the state. Bill 21 has true implications, and the appeals court has recognized this, and the use of the notwithstanding clause is not only constitutional, but legitimate for Bill 21. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned by the Prime Minister and myself, we are clearly committed to defend the rights and freedoms in the Canadian Charter, notably the right to freedom of religion, expression, and right to equality. On several occasions, we've also said that we have serious concerns with the prevented use of the notwithstanding clause. If this case does get heard by the Supreme Court, our government will be here.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister isn't worth the cost or the cover-up. For 3 years, this Prime Minister covered up a terrifying national security breach at Canada's highest security lab, hiding the fact that the head of special pathogens was actively collaborating with top Beijing military scientists engaged in biodefense and bioterrorism. So, in the face of that, will the Prime Minister accept responsibility for this colossal failure on his watch?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've answered that question on numerous occasions, but let me address the preposition at the start of that question, where he says the working together with another political party. He doesn't want to do that, and I get that. He's used to making partisan points and not reaching across the aisle and collaborating. But you know what happens when you collaborate, Mr. Speaker, when you work together? You get national Pharmacare. You get the ability to say to those that have diabetes that you've got your back and you've got medication. You say to women, we're going to give you real freedom. Freedom over your sexuality, freedom over your reproductive rights. That's what happens when you stop focusing on partisan politics and you start focusing on results.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
What a disgraceful answer from this minister. The national security culture begins at the top with the Prime Minister. This is a Prime Minister who said that he admires Beijing's basic dictatorship. This is a Prime Minister who, over the past 8 years, has repeatedly ignored Beijing's interference. So, in the face of that, is it any wonder that under this Prime Minister's watch, top Beijing military scientists had unfettered access to some of Canada's most sensitive biological secrets?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, in the first order, that isn't true. What is true is that the Public Health Agency of Canada, which is one of the most respected agencies in the world, that was there for us throughout the pandemic, is entirely responsible for its operations. And the truth is that there were two individuals hired. They were Canadian citizens, eminent scientists, well-known and well-respected across Canada and indeed around the world, who lied to the Public Health Agency of Canada. The Public Health Agency of Canada then took the very responsible action of firing those individuals, turning the matter over to the RCMP, where they currently are under investigation, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, where are they?
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton, had the opportunity to ask 2 questions. I'm certain he could speak to his House Leader to ask more questions in the House. But until that time, please, I'd ask him to wait his turn until he has the microphone, until he has the floor. The honourable member from Lennox.
He just changes his tone.
Evidence speaks otherwise. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP Prime Minister is not worth the cost nor the cover-up. He can't be trusted to keep our people safe. Yesterday, the entire nation was shocked to learn that this government granted 2 People's Liberation Army assets full access to secret research in a top-secret Canadian lab. This represents the biggest security breach since the Cold War. And this happened under a Prime Minister who famously said he admires China's basic dictatorship. Mr. Speaker, how can Canadians trust a Prime Minister that fails to take national security seriously?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the representations made by the member are inaccurate, and I would invite people to read the documents which have been fully redacted. But this is the contrast, Mr. Speaker, between a party that is focused on partisanship and difference. And you know what the member opposite talks about working with another party and what that might accomplish. What about dental care, Mr. Speaker? When we focused on cooperation, we were able to get dental care done for this country. We're able to make sure that 9 million Canadians, 3 million seniors will have access to dental care. They're voting against that. They're against that. Are they against Pharmacare? Are they against the other fruits of cooperation that come from...
It doesn't feel like the fruits of cooperation when I go to the grocery store, when I pay my oil bill.
Calgary.
Fruits of cooperation.
Colleagues, rather.
Fruits of something.
Colleagues.
Hey, Dental, what up?
Again, colleagues, it is very important for us, for those of us who have the ability to speak both languages, it's a clear advantage of being in the House that we don't require the use of the headsets. But for those of us who do require it, it's very difficult for them to hear the questions or the answers if there's too much noise in the House. I ask all members, out of respect to all of their colleagues in each of your respective caucuses, is to please listen respectfully to the answers and to the questions, so that those of us who require the use of earphones can do so. The honourable member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, the number of people unable to find an affordable place to live in Nanaimo, Ladysmith is staggering. And what have the Liberals done? Cut the Reaching Home funding to Nanaimo by 60%. And the Conservatives plan gut funding and leave it up to rich developers who just so happen to be their biggest donors. Nanaimo needs more support, not less. The Mayor of Nanaimo is calling for federal support. Will the minister provide the funding required for truly affordable housing in Nanaimo?
Hear, 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 hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to take up the specific matter with the member who just raised it after question period to know more about that specific case in Nanaimo. But what I will say is that this federal government is absolutely committed to ensuring there's greater supply. Supply is always what underpins a housing crisis in this country and every other country that's experiencing exactly that. We need to see more building, and that's why we've incented the private sector by lifting GST on the building of apartment rentals. We've moved forward to work with municipalities to see zoning changes where so much of this is dealt with in terms of affordability. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona.
I don't understand the question,
Democrats are
Dean.
delivering diabetes medicine and devices and contraceptives for all Canadians today. Free contraceptives are life-changing for women across this country. But shamefully, Danielle Smith said she doesn't want that for Albertans.
Right.
My constituents are outraged, and the Conservative leader, when he was asked by the media about this, literally ran away. So he didn't have to talk about fairness for women. Will this government ensure that they sign agreements with all provinces so all women, all Canadians have access to the...
I think this is going to interrupt again.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Access to medication for diabetes is not just a question of social justice. It's a question of saving lives. It's a question of prevention. It's a question of reducing costs enormously across this country. And I can say, and specifically with Alberta, that I've had very constructive conversations with Adriana Lagrange, who's been willing to work and find compromise, find that common ground. Unfortunately, across the aisle, that's not what we see. Today, the leader of the official opposition, the Conservatives, ran away when asked if he would support diabetes medication, refused to answer whether or not he would slash contraceptives for women. They are already against dental. I'd really like to know where they stand for Pharmacare.
Did you guys hear about the bill that Charlie Angus is bringing
The honourable
forward?
member from Pontiac.
Pretty crazy.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, journalists and newsrooms are one of the pillars of our democracy in Canada, and in rural communities like ours, they play a role that's even more fundamental. In December, the Minister of Heritage reached an historic agreement with Google to provide $100 million of funding to newsrooms. Can she give this House an update on how and when newsrooms, but especially local media, will have access to this funding? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And despite months of opposition from the Conservatives last year, we adopted the Online News Act, which allowed us to reach an historic agreement with Google. That's $100 million in funding that Google's going to invest in local media that would never have been available had the Conservatives been in power. And yesterday, Google launched its open bid office to ask for eligible newsrooms to apply. Canadians can be sure that on this side of the House, we are always going to stand up to ensure that technological giants pay their fair share to protect Canadian citizens. Thank you. I would just like to ask the member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier to respect people taking the floor. The honourable member for Regina-Capel.
Confused because it's not Conservatives making a link between these scientists and threats to national security. It's the government's own security agencies themselves saying that these individuals, quote, were collaborating with foreign entities that present a threat to the security of Canada. We're talking about research with pathogens and deadly viruses, while at the same time these individuals were on the payroll of the People's Liberation Army for the communist regime in Beijing. Now, rather than inform Canadians and come clean at the outset, the government went into overdrive to cover it up. How could the Prime Minister be so callous and selfish that he would try to protect himself rather than the security of Canadians?
That's pretty funny about Triumph, the insult Chihuahua. I remember him from Conan.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to answer to my colleague because Canada has shown leadership when it comes to national security, Mr. Speaker. That's something the Conservative will not want to highlight to Canadians. But let me refresh their memory because they tend to be selective when it comes to the facts. On the 16th of January, Mr. Speaker, we announced that we will ban funding for research in sensitive areas. There's 100 entities around the world, Mr. Speaker. We work with our Five Eyes allies. We work with research centers in this country. We work with university. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that we will always put national security first and defend the interest of Canada.
The honourable member from Regina-Capel.
They want to give themselves a gold star that finally, 3 years later, after fighting, kicking and screaming to keep these documents hidden, that now they've been released only because Conservatives demanded it. Let's remember the facts. They ignored and refused to comply with 4 parliamentary orders. They took the unprecedented step of taking the Speaker of the House of Commons to court to keep these documents hidden, and then they called a snap election hoping it would all go away. If this was all just an administrative issue, then why the cover-up?
So many cover-ups.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
In the first order, one of the things that is disturbing about what the member is supposing is that if he was in government, and I hope that that doesn't happen, that they would interfere in the redaction process and they would be involved in it. We obviously did not do that, particularly not with national security. What we did do, and in fact, the member opposite and I had a conversation about this. First, I suggested immediately that they see the documents at NSICOP. He said that wasn't good enough. So I created an ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee gave them the opportunity not only to see the documents, but put to an independent arbiter whether or not they should be released publicly. We did that together. The documents were released. They're now before us.
The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has recognized his admiration for China's basic dictatorship. After 8 years, he let the Chinese Communist Party interfere in our elections. He turned a blind eye to the interference with the Chinese diaspora. And with this Winnipeg lab matter, we see that there are people who represent a credible and serious danger to compromise Canada's national security. Will the Prime Minister finally admit that he tried to cover up these documents to protect himself instead of protecting Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, people listening at home must be saying, well, where were the Conservatives on January 16th? They must wonder, because on January 16th, Mr. Speaker, we announced as a government that we were going to ban funding. May I urge members, please, who have not been recognized, to wait their turn, and that way we'll be able to have a proper discussion instead of shouting across the aisle. The Honourable Minister, please continue. 22 seconds remaining. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the Conservatives will listen this time, because on January 16th, Mr. Speaker, we banned research in sensitive areas to work with 100 different companies. We are working with our allies to protect science, to protect intellectual property, and to protect the work that is done by our universities, Mr. Speaker. We are always there to defend Canada's interests. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Where was the minister, Mr. Speaker, in July 2019 when 2 scientists were expelled from Canada, Mr. Speaker, by CSIS? That was in 2019. That was more than 4 years ago, Mr. Speaker. What we learned yesterday is that the Prime Minister ignored 4 parliamentary orders to produce papers. He took the Speaker to court, which has never been seen before, for the worst cover-up in history. Why did the Prime Minister choose to protect himself instead of Canada's national security? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, people listening at home must be shocked. We have just told Conservatives once again that not only the Prime Minister, but all members of the government on this side of the House, we take national security seriously. On January 16th, we did not ban one research entity, but 100. So we are protecting universities and colleges from this type of thing. So that's the type of measure we're putting in place to protect Canada's interests. We always stand up for science. The Honourable Member from Montcalm. When it comes to health care, Quebecers want care, not threats. A year after having forced Quebec to accept an increase in health transfers that covers only 1/6 of their needs, the federal government is now threatening Quebec that it will steal $900 million if we don't submit our conditions by March 31st. The Liberals are once again playing political games at the expense of Quebecers with our own money. When will the Liberals finally stop taking ill people hostage and pay Quebec the margin or the money that it's entitled to. The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Bloc Québécois just likes to squabble. But when I spoke with Minister Lebel, it is clear that her objective is to cooperate and to find solutions. In our healthcare system, I think that Canadians and Quebecers want politicians, members, to find solutions, not to pick fights. And that is why I am very sure that we are going to find an agreement with Quebec. The Honourable Member from Moncton.
Hey, Tim, what's up?
Mr. Speaker, Pharmacare is not coming anytime soon. Bill C-64 refers to principles to consider when working towards the implementation of national universal pharmacare. Otherwise, in fact, that actually sounds like an election promise to me. The NDP is sold out very cheaply. But if one day, after having discussed these principles to consider when working towards the implementation of Pharmacare, if Ottawa comes up with a Pharmacare plan that Quebec has already, will Quebec be able to withdraw with full compensation, no strings attached? The Honourable Minister of Health.
All good here, Tim.
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, this year, for the first time in the history of the country, everyone with diabetes, everyone who needs contraceptives will be able to have access to them. That is such an historical announcement that it will change the lives of so many Canadians, even if Quebec already has such a program. Yesterday, I had a good conversation with Minister Dubé on this topic, and I think that we will reach an agreement with Quebec very soon.
Alderman Norfolk.
Common sense conservatives will ask the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP Prime Minister is not worth the cost, the crime, or the corruption. Never before in the history of this great nation have so many people have to resort to food banks. Thousands are now resorting to dumpster diving because they can no longer afford the cost of food. Will this Prime Minister show some compassion and cancel the April 1st carbon tax hike?
That's the right thing to do.
Dumpster diving used to be something else to me.
That colleague is from Ontario, where I'm from, Mr. Speaker, and the climate rebate that Ontarians will receive is over $1,100. That's for a family of 4. Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised, though, to hear that member and the Conservatives continue to bring up these points. They want to take money out of the pockets of Canadians. Today, historic legislation tabled in the House of Commons on Pharmacare. The Leader of the Opposition ran away when asked if he would support Pharmacare. When it comes to student loans and helping students, when it comes to EI, pensions in particular, they're nowhere to be seen. They want to make cuts. They're a party of austerity, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Haldeman, Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are getting back far less from this government than they're paying in carbon tax. According to Second Harvest, this year we'll see a 30% rise in the demand for food charity in some regions. Where I live in Southern Ontario, we produce food to feed the entire nation, yet so many families there still do not have enough income to cover basic food expenses. Why won't this government just do the right thing? Cancel the 23% carbon tax hike on April 1st so that Canadian families can afford food again.
Yeah, do the right thing.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Woman member who wants to take Canada out of the UN needs to know a little bit of good news for a change, Mr. Speaker. We've had many months of good news for Canadians. Just recently, Statistics Canada announced that in January we gained 37,000 new jobs, and there are 1 million more Canadians, Mr. Speaker, working than before the pandemic. The unemployment rate is at 5.7%, and wage growth is outpacing inflation, and that's even more true for women. You'd think that member would care about such things.
The honourable member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Because after 8 years, Canadians know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, crime, or corruption. Life has never been more expensive in this country. 1 million Canadians will be relying on food banks this year alone. And still, this Prime Minister is hell-bent on hiking the carbon tax up by 23% on April 1st. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Prime Minister cancel his carbon tax increase and help make life more affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Canadians have had enough of the gloom and doom coming from over here. They're deliberately ignoring the truth about how our government has supported Canadians.
Well, Speaker, sit down, Fergus. Shut your pie hole. Just stands there. It's all awkward. Comrades.
Order.
Oh. It's a pretty dirty look he's shooting.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, 2.3 million Canadians have been lifted out of poverty since this government took office and started caring about Canadians by putting supports in place that those guys had spent all their time cutting. Families throughout Canada have seen their child care fees slashed, in many cases down to $10 a day, thanks to this government and this Bill C-35 that we're getting ready to pass today.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Black Mental Health Week begins next week. It's a time to amplify Black voices and support equity in mental health. It is time to correct the disproportionate lack of Black health researchers so we can deliver culturally appropriate mental health solutions. It is time to act to improve the wide gap in health outcomes for many Black Canadians that is the result of historical and systemic anti-Black racism. Can the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions tell us what her department is doing to improve access to culturally safe and informed mental health services for Black communities across the country?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member. She is such a tremendous advocate on so many issues that matter to Canadians. Black communities across Canada continue to experience social and economic inequities which have persisted for far too long and have negative impacts on their mental health. We know there's more work to do, Mr. Speaker, and we're committed to doing the work together. Through programs like the Mental Health of Black Canadians Fund, we are supporting organizations to develop culturally safe, focused, knowledge-based programs with capacity to improve the mental health of Black Canadians and meet their needs. We'll keep working with the Black community across Canada, Mr.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Meanwhile, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians know he's not worth the cost of the crime or the corruption. And just yesterday, we learned that in the Prime Minister's $60 million Arrive scam, one of the contractors who was paid millions is actually a bureaucrat for this NDP Liberal government. That's why Common Sense Conservatives passed a motion in this House demanding that this government produce all of the documents on this Prime Minister scandal. Will he stand in his place and commit to releasing every last page?
The Honourable Minister of
Barrett's
National
great.
Defence.
One of my favorites.
Mr.
What do you guys think? You like Barrett?
24 hours. 24 hours after we became aware that the CEO of Dalian was a D&D employee, we've taken action, Mr. Speaker. We have suspended all contracts with Dalian. We have suspended the employee, and we have launched an investigation on how this person became an employee at D&D in the first place. Mr. Speaker, we will act to ensure that we protect the integrity of our institutions and our government.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's offer it a little louder for those in the back. What we're looking for is a commitment from this government to release every page of those documents, because after 8 years, it's clear to see that these Liberals aren't worth the corruption with their NDP Liberal Prime Minister. It's very clear, a $60 million scandal with people in their basements getting paid $20 million, not doing any IT work, and now we have that minister's staff who are getting paid millions of dollars while Canadians are lined up at food banks. So another question, and I'll say it loud so the minister can hear it, will they commit, stand in their place to getting Canadians' money back for their corruption?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'll simply remind the member opposite how quickly we acted. This information came to our attention yesterday, and since that time we have suspended all contracts with Dalian. We've suspended the member, and we've launched a thorough investigation that will determine how this individual became to be employed. Mr. Speaker, we are demonstrating.
Colleagues, especially the member from Brantford Branch who's about to get up to ask a question, just to remind that I expect all colleagues to have respect for each other and to wait their turn to speak
self-respect
when they're recognized by the chair. And at that point, when they have the opportunity to speak, I will also request that all people listen to that member. The Honourable Minister has 15 seconds left on the clock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to repeat what I've already said, except to remind the members of this House that when this information came to our attention, we took immediate action. We took the steps necessary to protect Canadians' interests and to remove this individual from our employ.
The Honourable Member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, common sense Conservatives will axe the tax. We will build the homes. We will fix the budget. We will stop the crime. Well, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost, crime or corruption. Yesterday, we learned that yet another company received $8 million tax dollars for the ArriveCan. But it gets better. This one, owned by a national defense bureaucrat. The rot continues. Yesterday, Parliament passed our motion to force the government to release all documents and to repay taxpayers. Will the government end the cover-up and release the documents? Yes or no?
Yes or no? You're not going to release the documents, Phil. Not until they're forced.
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite began his question by telling about all the things that the Conservatives propose to do at some distant point in the future.
Yeah, too, John.
But, Mr. Speaker, let us remember what they did when they were in government, where they cut the defence spending, for example, to less than 1% of GDP.
Less than 1%?
When they cut the resources of the police, our national security intelligence advisors, all of the people whose job it is to protect us and to maintain the integrity of our institutions, they cut them. And, Mr. Speaker, we've been rebuilding the government to get the work done, and we are prepared to take the action necessary.
I'll ask the Honourable Member from Southwest St. Margaret's, please, to wait his turn to ask a question.
That's Rick Perkins.
The Honourable Member,
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan. Mr. Speck, in Quebec, we're fortunate enough to have tourist attractions that charm people here, elsewhere in Canada and abroad. The tourism contribution represents more than 3% of employment and 2% of the GDP, whether it be for sustainable tourism, agritourism, outdoor experiences, Indigenous tourism, or rural tourism. Can the minister tell us how our government is going to maximize the growth potential of this sector? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. And he can tell everyone in his riding and all Quebecers that as of today, the Tourism Growth Fund is ready to receive applications from all kinds of companies and associations in order to choose projects and make tourists' experience better. Conservatives don't believe in tourism. They want to cut everywhere in Saguenay and Gaspésie, but on this side of the House, we stand up for tourism in Canada. Thank you.
They stand up for everything.
The Honourable Member from South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, last summer's wildfires devastated communities across Canada, and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness has admitted that the upcoming wildfire season will be even worse. Canadians want their government to take decisive action, and according to last week's Abacus poll, 74% of them want to see this done through a new national wildfire fighting force. But the Liberals are taking a go-slow approach. The wildfire season is already starting, so when will this government act to create a national wildfire fighting force?
That's right.
The Honourable Minister.
I want to thank the member for the question. In fact, actually, we're taking immediate action, taking the lessons learned from not only last year, but previous years as well. First and foremost, we need to make sure that all the resources that we put in place go directly to fighting wildfires, and that's to the local level. So we have already trained approximately 500 firefighters, Mr. Speaker, putting more personnel to support on the recovery. Yes, we are reviewing the overall national system as well. Any support that we provide, we're going to make sure that it actually has the maximum impact. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we're learning that Palestinians in Gaza have been shot and killed while waiting for aid at a time when the UN reports at least a quarter of those in Gaza are one step from famine. Meanwhile, Amnesty International reports that Israel has failed to comply with the ICJ ruling requiring them to take immediate steps to prevent genocide, including allowing humanitarian aid in. In light of this, when will this government reinstate UNRWA funding, which millions of Palestinians rely on for food, and call on Israel to follow the ICJ ruling?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Stories coming out of Gaza are extremely preoccupying. This is catastrophic. I would call this a nightmare scenario. So, at all times, international humanitarian law must be respected, and both parties must respect the ICJ ruling. And we need to do more to make sure that humanitarian aid is going into Gaza, and at all times, civilians must be protected. Thank you so much.
This brings to an end a question period. I see the Honourable Member from Regina Capel is rising.
So, they're finished there. So what do you think, guys? It's never as much fun when Poilievre isn't there. He's such an entertaining politician. It is kind of nice when Trudeau's... I don't know if I prefer when Trudeau's there or not. Like, there's some of the politicians that are just hard to watch. And Trudeau's definitely one of them. Freeland wasn't there today. But then, every time we're missing one, there's another one that's just as bad. Like, these awful voices. I did notice today, Heather McPherson, NDP, Alberta, I think, NDP MP. She's got a pretty terrible voice too. Who do you guys think are the worst voices? Because I go with Freeland, Anon, and that little Jennifer O'Connell. She's got a bad voice. There's a few of them. Jolie doesn't have a bad voice, but the things she says, she's such a hippy dippy, like, and seems clueless. I don't know. Just my thoughts. Anyways, guys, we're going to wrap up. It's been a lot of fun. I love the chat. It's so much fun to see everybody here every day and watch some federal Canadian politics together, make some fun of our politicians. It's great. So we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is an earlier start on Fridays. They start at instead of 3, they launch at 12. So 3 hours earlier tomorrow, but we'll have other videos out there. So again, share it with somebody that might be interested in watching some Canadian politics, like, because you do figure out what's been going on. Like, I know so much more about politics now than I did a couple of months ago. It's ridiculous. Anyways, guys, I'm going to get going. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to stay warm, have something healthy to eat today. It's crazy how different the gas prices are across the country. That's weird. Just to see that in the chat earlier today, that was a strange one. Anyways, we're going to get going. Thank you all for watching. We'll catch you tomorrow.